I've watched a lot of biopics over the years, and I don't think a lot of people would disagree with me when I say most of these films feel the same. Whether it's a biopic about Freddie Mercury, or Stephen Hawking, or J.R.R. Tolkien, I feel like they're often so overly saccharine, conforming to the desire to glorify historical figures rather than tell stories about real people. I feel like I'm seeing a good movie when I watch it, but when I walk away, I realize I really watched a cinematic Cliff Notes summary that I wasn't that invested in, that was made for the sole purpose of making me feel good and nothing else. A subset of biopics that tends to be egregiously formulaic is the musical biopic, like your Bohemian Rhapsodies or Walk the Lines. I won't delve too deeply into the hallmarks and pitfalls of this type of film. Instead, I'll direct you to this excellent video by Patrick H. Willems, who does an incredible job of breaking down this very subject, and from which I actually drew a lot of inspiration for this video. For the purposes of this video, I will give you this shoddy summary. So the music biopic tends to follow this general trajectory. We're introduced to our musical figure at the pinnacle of their career, then jump back to some traumatic childhood experience. Then we have a moment of discovery where one show seems to lead to immediate success, with maybe a scene or two of winning over a music executive. We have moments of inspiration that instantly lead to genius songs being performed, as if songs sprout fully formed from an artist's imagination, like Athena from the head of Zeus.
Oh, that's really good.
We have tours, more gigs, maybe some womanizing, more gigs, more fame. Fame inevitably leads to some failure of character, probably drugs, and the breakdown of important relationships. But then we have the triumph over this failure of character, probably drugs. And then we have the most essential element of this formula, the triumphant comeback show. These films often try to cover decades worth of musical career, forcing an entire life to conform to this one cliched and simplistic narrative. They ram this message down our throats about how inspirational this person was despite all these obstacles. But that's the thing, we already knew that. All this accomplishes is to make each artist indistinguishable, even forgettable. And I think what needles me the most about many musical biopics is how they so blatantly want to manipulate your nostalgia. Bohemian Rhapsody does this so often it's nauseating. It so obviously wants to push the greatest hits in your face. Like, remember Bohemian Rhapsody? That song you love singing along to? Oh, you love that song, don't you? Oh, and remember We Will Rock You? Remember that sick beat? Remember that bass riff for Another One Bites the Dust? Cool. Remember that awesome video for I Want to Break Free? Remember how great that Live Aid performance of Radio Gaga was? All this is probably why I found the film Control incredibly refreshing when I rewatched it recently, despite its somber subject. Control focuses on the last 7 years of the life of Ian Curtis, the troubled frontman of the incredibly influential British band Joy Division. The film is based on the book Touching from a Distance, Ian's biography written by his wife Deborah Curtis. It follows him from meeting Debbie in his teens to the rise of Joy Division and his extramarital affair with the journalist Anik Anore, to his epilepsy diagnosis and deteriorating mental state, culminating in his eventual suicide in May of 1980 at the age of 23, on the eve of the band's first tour of America. The film explores his fraught relationship with fame, the women he loved, and his own body. I first watched Control a decade ago, and I loved the gritty rock atmosphere of the film and how the black and white cinematography and the dialogue recall a British musical era gone by. And I found Sam Riley absolutely heartbreaking as Ian. In the years since, I don't think any other biopic has made the same singular impression on me that this film did. There is just something that gives the film its own character, that feels different. There are so many biopics I watched, liked watching, but eventually forgot, but I have never forgotten Control. On its face, Control seems to have a lot of the typical hallmarks of the music biopic. The first gig, impressing musical executives, recording albums, and yes, womanizing, etc. But that's where the similarities end. For starters, Control does not hold back from the grimy realities that paralleled the band's success. We see that at the beginning, the band would drive for hours to gigs with scanty audiences. And even as Joy Division performs more and becomes more acclaimed, this does not guarantee their financial success. When Ian quits his day job to pursue the band full-time, Debbie is forced to get a job as a barmaid, even though she's just given birth to their daughter. There's a few adherences to rumors, like Tony Wilson signing the band's contract in his blood, but that's just fun hat tips to legends that add levity to an otherwise grim film. Overall, I think we'd be hard-pressed to come away believing Joy Division had a smooth and glamorous rise to fame. And I think adapting Ian Curtis's life in particular must have posed its own unique challenge. Ian's life does not conform to the easy, upbeat narratives of other rock biopics. In both life and death, he was notoriously opaque and enigmatic even to those close to him. He never talked openly about what was on his mind. In many ways, he was unknowable, perhaps even to himself. I think this line from Anik sums this up best.
I never felt this way before. At the same time, I feel like I don't really know anything about you.
Although many people cared for Ian, not many of them could say they truly understood him, and that's why there are no simple conclusions that can be drawn about him, no easy answers about how things could have been different. There is no upward trajectory from his spiral downwards. There is no triumphant Live Aid concert that can soften the reality of his death. With this in mind, I find it really admirable that while the film invites you to empathize with Ian, it also doesn't try too hard to give you an overly positive impression of him either. The film doesn't go out of its way to excuse all the questionable things he does. Now, maybe that's what to expect if your film is based on the book by your subject's wife, whom the subject famously cheated on. Although apparently Anik Honore has come out saying that her relationship with Ian was actually super platonic, so I guess we'll never know. But the thing about Deborah Curtis's book is that it doesn't read like it's overly bitter or overly precious about Ian. It's a thorough account of the ups and downs of a troubled relationship, of a woman observing her spouse from the outside. And that's what the film accomplishes. It presents us with the messy reality of how people are remembered, an amalgamation of external observations. And accordingly, the film's director, Anton Corbijn, does not reduce Ian down to any simplistic narrative or provide easy answers. Instead, Corbijn leans heavily into the themes that defined Ian's life. It's important to note that before Control, Corbijn had never actually directed a feature film. He was actually primarily a photographer and music video director. He'd met the band before and directed the video for their song Atmosphere after Ian died. His background as a photographer really shows in the visual language of the film, as many of the shots are artfully and very deliberately composed. The film conveys Ian's loneliness by finding ways to separate him from others, whether by moving him away from his bandmates as he becomes less of an active participant in his band's success, or by surrounding him with negative space, like this shot where Ian steps outside of the hospital just after his daughter Natalie is born, already emotionally alienated from the experience of fatherhood. When the film comments on his relationship with his child again, it's when Ian arrives home from a tour, and we see a shot of Ian from baby Natalie's perspective through the bars of her playpen, almost as if Natalie Curtis herself is conveying how she saw her father, a distant figure from whom she was, and always would be, separated. As the film progresses, the visual isolation of Ian becomes more and more pronounced, representing his further withdrawal inwards, foreshadowing his tragic end. But what I find more interesting is how this film is written in order to convey Ian's disconnect with the rest of the world. Ian is rarely very expressive in the course of this film. He seldom fully communicates his emotions to his wife or his bandmates, and even after his first suicide attempt, people don't probe him for answers. So much of this film's dialogue consists of failed communications between Ian and other people, whether by Ian's reluctance to communicate,
Just answer me! Please answer me!
or by others not knowing how.
Ian, you are confusing me.
We are given exchange after exchange where Ian and another person are unable to establish an understanding. Let's take a look at this scene between Ian and Anik.
Well, what do you want to know?
Tell me your favorite movie.
I really like The Sound of Music. Anything else?
Your favorite color? Mine is purple.
Blue. Man City blue.
So, what did we learn about Ian from this scene? We know that he likes the film The Sound of Music, and that his favorite color is blue. But do we know why he likes these things? And why doesn't Anik ask him? I would argue that Anik is no closer to truly understanding Ian than she was before. Also, let's observe this dialogue between Ian and Tony Wilson, who ran Joy Division's label.
It's all coming apart.
No, it's all coming together. Tonight was great. It'll go down in history. You remember Lou Reed at the Free Trade Hall?
The riot.
That's right, the fucking riot. Best gig I've ever been to.
It all used to be so simple. Everything. Now everyone hates me. I've made everyone hate me.
No one hates you.
Even the people who love me hate me.
What, Debbie?
And Natalie.
How can Natalie hate you, for Christ's sake?
She will, though. I know she will.
You're a good dad, Ian.
No, Tony, I'm not.
This one time that Ian wants to openly express his despair at what his life has come to, Tony Wilson wants to hype Ian up for more shows, so he keeps denying Ian's reality and saying everything is fine. The push and pull of these two conversational goals result in an exchange where no mutual understanding is reached. When Ian does express himself, it is mainly through his art. Ian is only truly free during his performances, where he has true autonomy. He is free to express himself as he wishes through his body and voice, making it all the more heartbreaking when his struggle with epilepsy starts to chip away at his bodily autonomy and disrupts this elevated experience, when the pressures of fame begin to drain the joy out of the thing that liberated him. The film also emphasizes Ian's eloquence through his lyrics, poetry, and letters, which Sam Riley reads aloud in voiceovers.
So this is permanence. Love's shattered pride. What once was innocence turned on its side.
The film doesn't focus on the creation of Joy Division's music for a reason. Ian was primarily a writer and lyricist. Ian's lyrics were the primary way he communicated with the world, and the film invites us to pay attention to the content of his verses without the distraction of the music. I think this is an important decision since the music often distracted many people from Ian's lyrics, including the rest of the band, who chose to focus on creating the music rather than paying attention to what the lyrics were saying and perhaps interpreting Ian's mental state as it deteriorated. Bernard Sumner has actually admitted that the band never really listened to Ian's words, feeling that it was none of their business to ask Ian about them. It makes it so much more tragic that despite how Ian opened himself up in the most public way possible, hardly anyone really heard him. Control isn't a perfect film, and there are things I believe could have been done better to add to it, but it's one of the more grounded and honest biopics there are. Not so much honesty in that it gets all the facts exactly right, but more in the way that it cares for its subject's humanity. I don't think it takes away from celebrating a person when we highlight their faults or admit that some of their sadnesses are insurmountable. If anything, treating a historical figure with nuance can only make them more real in our collective memory. Maybe we would actually have a glimpse of what set them apart and made them unique individuals, what truly made them burn so bright.